All right, I was in a bit of a quandary about what to do with Žižek. I'm going with Slavoj Žižek. Maybe I should have looked that up 17 more times. My daughter Emma did take a graduate seminar with him and Avital Ronell at NYU. So again, we have a living figure, unlike most of the ones we've seen. Philip Pettit being the other exception. Now, I mean, and the quandary, I mean, one of a number of quandaries with dealing with Zizek is the extreme profusion of his authorship. Like, where would one even start? I've read a bunch of Zizek, but, no one who's not making a living at it or something can read all of Zizek. It's amazing. I get the feeling the man loves to write. And so I'm going to express some admiration for Žižek before I do anything else. I think he's a wonderful writer and much sharper as a philosopher, too, than a number of the people we've mentioned or dealt with. For example, his allies, close cohort, Frederick Jameson and Alain Badiou. He writes much, much better than they do. And he writes occasionally. He writes about he writes about contemporary developments as they arise. He writes about pop culture. He loves film. He writes about television. There's always an unexpected turn in his writing, and he's always worth reading. That's my opinion. Okay. And I mean, I admire a lot of stuff that he's done. For example, this book really helped me with Schelling and stuff. And it's really creative. It's really knowledgeable too. I'm sorry, it's because I realize this is audio for many. The Indivisible Remainder on Schelling and Related Matters. All right, but even to unpeel all Zizek's writing about Schelling would take a long time. Plus, I mean, another element of my quandary is that I can't find my marked up copy of Sublime Objective Ideology. Damn, it's around here somewhere, dude. I don't know, man. You see it behind me? There's a shelf of Graeber books and stuff behind me. He's an incredibly creative force and unique as well. Okay, and I guess for example, the dialectic, the synthesis of Freud and Marx. If I read that in Eagleton or Jameson, it leaves me just rolling my eyes. Like, Lord knows, you'll take anything from anywhere and just like toss it out with total carelessness or whatever. I mean, as if it's profound and systematic and it all works together or something like this, but it obviously so palpably does not. Now, for Zizek, though, okay, so like if he's bopping Lacan, Hegel, Marx, Schelling, whatever he's doing, man, 1,000 things. Sloterdijk, all kinds of stuff. Lenin, that's his big hero, Vladimir Lenin. He's doing it with this creative, wild tone. Like, I just have the feeling like it gives almost a feeling of being at play. Now, if you're combining Freud and Marx playfully, that could be fun and interesting things could happen. If you're just grinding orthodoxy, if you're just grinding two orthodoxies that can ne'er meet all day in a most uncreative and saying as such all the time, a la Jameson, you ain't doing nothing. All right, so Zizek has been a kind of one-man revival of totalitarian leftism, since '90 or since the Sublime Object hit. And like I say, like people like Jameson and Badiou, it's not that they didn't have their own reputations and everything, but he kind of packaged them up, repackaged them for more generations, made them pop, made them feel hopeful. I don't know how they felt inside hopeful, but man, reading them does not make me feel hopeful. But, reading Zizek kind of makes me feel hopeful just because I think like it could be fun, playful future, even though as long as it doesn't. But he flirts with totalitarianism all the time. It's always Robespierre, Robespierre, Robespierre. Really, man, he just wants it. You can feel it. All right. Like he wrote the introduction to this book. The title of this edition is Slavoj Žižek Presents Trotsky, Terrorism and Communism. And the spirit of Trotsky's text is yay terrorism, and we're going to have to do a massive repression. Kaboom, slave labor, imprisonment, executions, terrorism. Zizek argues in his introduction that you can to excuse Trotsky here, you got to say this is written in 1920 as the repressing the Civil War. This is war communism. This is not the forced labor in all this might sound like Stalinism, but this is not Trotsky doing Stalin, because this is in the middle of a war, or just after victory of the war, as the counter-revolution continues to threaten. All right. So this is war communism, not envisioned by Trotsky, who is hero enough to get through this because of this text. Like, he loves Lenin. He doesn't love Trotsky. If you love Lenin, you don't love Trotsky. Well, if you love Stalin, you don't love Trotsky. I don't know. Sometimes he seems skeptical of Stalin. Sometimes he loves Stalin. But anyway, he likes Trotsky enough to get through this book. Early Trotsky, Bolshevik Trotsky, direct Bolshevik Trotsky. And so the slave labor and other, terroristic repression of war communism is one thing. But, that's not what the ultimate idea is. But over and over through, like, generations of texts and stuff, Zizek is sort of experimenting, playing, tossing out the notion that that's what we need now. War communism. Which does mean slave labor and terroristic, forced labor, and terroristic speech repression and shit, Now, so this is what solves my Zizek dilemma. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read just a few paragraphs from this book, The Idea of Communism. There are 3 editions, or 3 volumes of this collection of texts from the revival of communism meetings from 2009, 11, I think, in different parts of the world. It's typical that Zizek is in the middle of all this, putting all these figures together. Alain Badiou, Judith Balso, Bruno Bastiles, Susan Butt Morris, Costas Douzinas, Terry Eagleton, Negri, Rancière, Toscano Vadimo, Hart, Nancy. Okay. And bringing a revival of communism in the face of, so he the heroic period of egalitarian leftism, he says, is 1917 to 1989. And then he talks in various texts, including, his text here in the Jameson book. I got an avalanche of books going on. An American Utopia. He's at the center of all these developments. He brings this out, I think. Jameson. Where did I start that thought? Not sure. Okay, the idea, the golden period is 1917 to 1989. And then he talks all the time for those who want to remain faithful to communism, for those who want to remain faithful to Marxism, Leninism, etc. Which is really, it's kind of befuddling, a little bit. I mean, for real. All right, so by communism, he means totalitarian statist communism. I just think that's flatly the case. By communism, I might mean, strictly speaking, to start with, if I was talking to somebody about what the meaning of communism is, I would start with it rejects private property, because you can be a communist anarchist. That's not one of the things that is possible here. What I'm going to do is read a fairly long passage, kind of 3 fairly long paragraphs. No, just 2. Which I think stand pretty good as a summary of a lot of developments out of Žižek. All right. There is, however, this is that's on page 216 of The Idea of Communism, the first volume. Žižek's contribution. He also wrote the introduction, I believe. Is that true? Oh, heck. Co-wrote the introduction and co-edited the volume. There is, however, a recurrent problem we encounter here. The passage from the Jacobins to Napoleon, from the October Revolution to Stalin, from Mao's Cultural Revolution to Deng Xiaoping's capitalism. Let's call it Xi Jinping's capitalism. How are we to read this passage, mega capitalism? How are we to read this passage? Jacobins to Napoleon, October Revolution to Stalin, Mao to Deng Xiaoping. In the second phase, Thermidor, he writes about this so much that he has a name for the second phase of the revolution, actually maybe the third phase, post-terror. The second phase, Thermidor, the truth of the first revolutionary phase, as Marx sometimes seems to claim, is the second phase, the Thermidor, the terror, the truth of the revolutionary phase, as Marx sometimes seems to claim, or is it just the revolutionary evental series? Or is it just that the revolutionary evental series has exhausted itself? Let us focus briefly on the Cultural Revolution, which we can read at 2 different levels. If read as a part of historical reality, that is being in parentheses, it can easily be submitted to a dialectical analysis which perceives the final outcome of a historical process as its truth. The ultimate failure of the Cultural Revolution bears witness to the inherent inconsistency of the very project, the notion of the Cultural Revolution, because we could read it that way, because it led to this mega capitalist phase. I don't know how Žižek really reads China. I'm sure he does over and over. That shows the inconsistency or the error at the heart of the Cultural Revolution, of the terroristic repression and totalitarianism of the Cultural Revolution. So the objection might go. He says, it is the explication, deployment, actualization of these inconsistencies. That is, like the Deng Xiaoping phrase, is the explication, deployment, actualization of the inconsistencies of the Cultural Revolution, which sounds vaguely Marxist or Hegelian as a dialectical reading of history. In the same way that, for Marx, the vulgar, non-heroic, capitalist daily life of profit-seeking is the truth of Jacobin revolutionary heroism, because that was a bourgeois revolution. If, however, we analyze it as an event, capital E, event, and now he is using the language of his ally Alain Badiou, I think. Capital E, event. We're really rocking some Hegel. This is one thing I want to draw your attention to, how many of the strands of Western totalitarian thinking run together in this just couple of paragraphs. As an enactment of the eternal idea, capital I, of egalitarian justice, capital J, then the ultimate factual result of the Cultural Revolution, its catastrophic failure and reversal into the recent capitalist explosion, does not exhaust the real, R-E-A-L, of the Cultural Revolution. The eternal idea of the Cultural Revolution survives its defeat in socio-historical reality. It continues to lead the underground spectral life of the ghosts of failed utopias, which haunt future generations, patiently awaiting its next resurrection. Now, that is a very nice basic statement of the thesis of the sublime objective ideology. Žižek's first sort of thunderclap book. In reality, it sucked beyond belief, man. Like, actually, lots of death and unbelievable suffering. Millions. Not only lots of death and unbelievable suffering and arbitrary repression, but also it didn't succeed. It ended up in a capitalist system. I don't think you can straight up say that about communist China. The state capitalism thing is another word for socialism or something like that. Okay, so but the idea, the Platonic idea of the revolution or whatever, is the sublime object that we can aspire to. And really what's fucking everything up in this, late capitalist phase is that we've lost the imagination that will put us into contact with the sublime objective ideology. One thing I want to really strongly connect that to right here is the theme we've been developing of fictionalism. The real thing sucked. It sucked beyond belief. But the idea is eternal and it will return. Of course, when it does return, it'll suck beyond belief. But the idea is eternal and will return. And it's like Hegel, but it's actually Plato. And really, it's got the eternal idea of the Cultural Revolution. Survives its defeat in socio-historical reality. It continues to lead the underground spectral life of ghosts of failed utopias. This brings us back to Robespierre, his real hero. Because we love the terror, the self-devouring terror of Robespierre, who expressed in a touching way the simple faith in the eternal idea, capital I, of freedom, which persists through all defeats, without which, as was clear to him, a revolution is just a noisy crime that destroys another crime. Without the Platonic idea. I'm just saying, like, that's just a fictional bunch of crap, dude. Like, whatever. Like, the Platonic idea behind your revolution. I'm talking about the shit you're doing right now, bitch. We're just mammals down here, man. Like, I don't know what you're trafficking in, these unbelievable abstractions, and you're using them to justify mass murder, bro. Like, the metaphysics drives the murder, and the metaphysics is crap. Okay? The eternal idea of Thermidor drives the killing fields. The eternal idea of the killing fields will drive the next beautiful murder. The faith most poignantly expressed in his very last speech, Robespierre's, on 8 Thermidor, 1794, the day before his arrest and execution. But there do exist, I can assure you, souls that are feeling and pure. It exists that tender, imperious, and irresistible passion, the torment and delight of magnanimous hearts, that deep horror of tyranny, that compassionate zeal for the oppressed, that sacred love for the homeland, that even more sublime and holy love for humanity, without which a great revolution is just a noisy crime that destroys another crime. It does exist, that generous ambition to establish here on earth the world's first republic, without which a great revolution is just a noisy crime that destroys another crime, that sacred love for the homeland. It does exist in the Platonic realm of the forms, dude. Here it's going to be crimes, 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 terror, terror, terrorism. But it's all redeemed by the sublimity of the abstractions under whose name, but hardly reality, we are acting. Don't go down this road if you don't want to end up really just fucking wrong, just grossly evil. Like if you're not going to persuade yourself, if you don't want to just persuade yourself to Satanism or whatever, okay, don't walk down this road of rationalization. Try something else. Does this same not hold even more for the last big installment in the life of this idea? Last big installment in the life of the Thermidor idea, the Maoist Cultural Revolution. Without this idea, which sustained the revolutionary enthusiasm, the Cultural Revolution was to an even greater degree just a noisy crime that destroys another crime. And, it was just a noisy crime that destroys another crime. And the noise, though, is this, okay? The idea of equality or whatever. One should recall here Hegel's sublime words on the French Revolution, as all strands of Western totalitarian run together in a beautiful braid. From his lectures on the philosophy of world history, which, of course, did not prevent him from coldly analyzing the inner necessity of this explosion of abstract freedom, turning into its opposite, the self-destructive revolutionary terror. However, one should never forget that Hegel's critique is imminent. So this is going to be excusing Hegel for condemning the terror. Accepting the basic principle of the French Revolution and of its key supplement, the Haitian Revolution. And one should do exactly the same apropos of the October Revolution and later the Chinese Revolution. It was the first case in the entire history of humanity of a successful revolt on the part of the exploited poor. They were the zero-level members of a new society that set new standards. The revolution stabilized itself into a new social order, a new world was created and miraculously survived for decades after the Russian Revolution, amid unthinkable economic and military pressure and isolation. This was effectively a glorious mental dawn. All thinking beings shared in the jubilation of this epoch. Against all hierarchic orders, egalitarian universality directly came to power after the Soviet Revolution in the 20th century. This is what the Hegelian approach clearly sees. Far from reducing the revolutionary explosion to its final outcome, it fully acknowledges the universal eternal moment. Perhaps the time has come to turn this mantra around and admit that a dose of this Jacobin-Leninist paradigm is precisely Žižek's politics. That's the name of Žižek's politics, the Jacobin-Leninist paradigm, the revolutionary terror war communism paradigm of centralized, the Jacobin-Leninist paradigm of centralized dictatorial power. Perhaps that is precisely what the left needs today. Precisely what the left needs today. The Jacobin leftist paradigm of centralized dictatorial power. That's a quote. Today, more than ever, one should insist on what Badiou called the eternal idea of communism, or the communist invariance. Its four fundamental concepts at work from Plato, who, I guess there's elements of Plato, of communism in the Republic, through the medieval millenarian revolts to Jacobinism, Leninism and Maoism, Okay, so then we get the 4-point program of Jacobin-Leninist centralized dictatorial power, which is just what the left needs today. Was that 2000? Just what the left needs today. 2010. That's not what anybody needs ever, ever, ever again. The way this plays in academia and this way this plays across leftist politics and the reception of Žižek, you gotta say it's awful disturbing. Although it's kind of understandable because, like I say, he's like quite a delightful writer and such a varied and wild thinker and individual. Now, that's kind of the end of the series, I think. And like I say, here you got Plato and Hegel and Marx and all these people running, Badiou, all running together. You know, and it's Žižek, everybody runs together in Žižek. It's really very impressive. I think I might do a Coda episode. I don't know if that'd be a while coming. Maybe I'll try to watch these all back or listen to them all back and think about writing out a summary of this or something like that. But Lord, this is ain't this a disturbing history? A rich and nightmarish history of philosophers arguing themselves into positions of terroristic and totalitarian surveillance, repression, execution, liquidation, very radical, war communism or Nazism. The whole intellectual tradition is connected with that. At any rate, let's call it a day for the time being.